Hey everybody, so we're going to get started here. Looks like it's going to turn 2 p.m. in just a few seconds, so I jumped the gun. But here we are. So welcome to today's Brain Food event, New and Emerging Payment Scams, a guide for financial leaders. We're excited to deliver this webinar. We've done something like this one similar in the past in person, back when we could all go to restaurants and enjoy food and beverages. But the information in here is really great and relevant to the landscape we're in today, and we're excited to share some more information with everybody today. Before we get started, some quick housekeeping items. Hopefully, with all the storms rolling through, power stays on, internet stays connected, and toddlers and dogs and cats stay out of our rooms. We're still working remote by and large at SWICKtech, so I don't foresee anything like that happening. For those that don't know, and are new to SWICKtech, my name is Eric Clark. I'm one of our client success associates. I do some account management, some external sales, and help on some marketing efforts like these, our webinars. And joining us today on the webinar is Penny Faust. And Penny, I'll let you introduce yourself. I don't want to take any missteps. Luckily, your last name's easy to pronounce, though.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Penny Faust. I am the Vice President of Commercial Treasury Solutions for North Shore Bank. So what that means is I run all of our cash management products and services, payment solutions for business clients. So really, if it's not a commercial loan, it would fall under my roof, which is a lot of payment processing, online banking, wire transfers, anything that regards to the payment solutions that you use every day as a business customer is really what falls into my group at North Shore Bank. I'm a certified treasury professional. I've been in the industry for over 25 years, really dedicated to cash management and treasury management on the business side of the house. So definitely excited to partner with SWICKtech today to really talk through how the IT infrastructure relates to the banking side of the house and payments fraud as well.
Thank you. And just a little bit about SWICKtech. This is one of the funnier photos we have of the group. Our IT folks and our admin staff and just the whole company. We're about 30 people. We are in New Berlin, Wisconsin. We've been around for going on 16 years in business. And, traditionally we're a managed service provider. We've really graduated upmarket quite a bit, and our focus, short of protecting your data and preventing data loss and things of that nature and being good stewards of your IT and a business partner, has been very heavy on cybersecurity. In today's landscape, it is prevalent, and there is a lot that businesses can and ought to be doing to protect themselves. And so we've been a leader in that side of things for some time and enjoy helping businesses kind of overcome some of those challenges. So that's in a tiny, tiny nutshell, a little tiny bit about SWICKtech. And Penny, if you want to talk about North Shore Bank for a moment, that would be fantastic.
Absolutely. So North Shore Bank, we're headquartered here in Brookfield, Wisconsin. We have about 45 branches today across the state of Wisconsin, 2 branches in Northern Illinois. Certainly, we are a full-service financial institution. We follow our customers primarily headquartered in Wisconsin, but anywhere in the world that they might be located. So again, our key is we are a local financial institution. We've been around for almost 100 years, about a $2 billion corporation as far as asset size goes. So we are a very large bank all over the state. However, we're still local, here to service our business customers, retail clients, and again, very happy to be here for almost 100 years serving our customers. I've been with North Shore Bank now about 5 years. I'm very excited to bring some of these treasury solutions that we talked about earlier to our business clients across the footprint.
That's great. And that's a beautiful location, wherever this one is.
Yeah, that one, good question. It looks like it might be Shorewood.
Nice and new. Well, we'll kick things off here and start diving into the content of the webinar. I'll let you start, and I think I'll jump in on this slide and maybe a couple others along the way to help with some of the technical items.
Super. So the slide that you have in front of you really is from an FBI resource that we use a lot at the bank, and it's called IC3. IC3 is nothing more than it stands for the Internet Crime Complaint Center. It's a really great resource. It's kept up to date and current, so I would encourage the folks attending today to check that out at some point. But the IC3 puts together an annual Internet crime report every year. What they really do is they monitor trending scams, everything from business email compromise, ransomware, elderly fraud, tech support, not just related to the business side, but business and consumers alike. One of the things that I would point out is the big red bullet point on awareness and reporting. One of the biggest things that we struggle with as a financial institution, or financial institutions in general, is these crimes are happening and we really need folks to report them. The reporting, even though, as you can see here, the IC3 received 467,000 complaints in 2019 alone, that's just a fraction of the fraud that's actually taking place. That's just what's being reported. And the more that folks can report this, the more we collectively, as financial institutions, technology companies like SWICKtech, can work together to really help the FBI and other organizations close this down and stop it from happening where we can. One of the things that you'll see here from the report from 2019, the most prevalent crimes reported last year, you'll see here the vishing, phishing, smishing, farming, the non-payment, personal data breach, and extortion. Those are the most prevalent crimes reported. And the reason it makes sense that we partner with a company like SWICKtech to do these presentations is so often our customers don't really know what is vishing. The last fraud seminar that I did, when I said phishing, vishing, people didn't know really what the new vishing was. So I'm going to ask Eric just to touch on those for a moment so people really get an idea of what that means when we're throwing those words around.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to kind of define some of the stuff. You're definitely right. I think most people know what phishing is. To some degree, it's an attack or a scam where the attacker attempts to impersonate or trick the target into giving away sensitive information. So they're really trying to get information from you. There's also something called spear phishing, where it's very targeted and they're targeting almost even a specific person or group of people. Vishing is the same type of a scam. However, in this case, hackers will try to gain information over the phone. So, I have a couple things written up on this. It's fairly word intensive, but, the example here is interesting. What do an online bank account and COVID-19 have in common? And the answer is not much, unless you're a fraudster, like the one who sent a bank's customer an email advising them to call the bank to resolve a missed payment. It was in most part a typical ploy, except that it included the line, "If your financial situation has been impacted by COVID-19, please call us to discuss your options." So right now in today's landscape, a lot of these attacks remain very similar, but the bait has been switched to be mirrored to the COVID situation. And then smishing, which for some reason I always want to call schmishing, which is funny to me, is similar again. However, this is short for SMS, which stands for like a text message. So the hackers can send these bogus links via text instead of an email. So they're really starting to cover their bases insofar as the mediums they're choosing to deploy these attacks. So the attack is, again, similar. It's the way they're deploying it that has changed. In that definition, in farming is the fraudulent practice of directing internet users to bogus websites that mimic the appearance of a legitimate one. So SWICKtech has hosted webinars on this in identifying malicious emails, links, and sites and what to look out for there. In those instances, it's very critical to pay attention to the URL you're looking at, because those farming sites can be replicated, unfortunately for us, really, really well, which is why they're successful for the attackers in kind of achieving their goal of funding themselves. So that's some of the definitions I have.
Thanks, Eric. And that really is the majority of the time, outside of when we work on check fraud at a bank, the majority of the time when we're working at payments fraud, it really is a result of one of these items. The phishing, the vishing, the smishing, one of these items is usually how these fraudsters are getting access to your payment information and what they need to do to misdirect funds or redirect funds. And we'll talk about that more as we go through today's presentation. The highest losses that the IC3 reported for 2019 really is still all related to business email compromise. I know this sounds like it's getting old, but it's still the primary form that folks are using, fraudsters are using in order to compromise the information. So in the terms of highest losses, business email compromise, according to IC3, still tops their list. Other things that we don't see so much on the bank side, but it's this confidence and romance fraud scams, as well as spoofing, which is really what's leading to the highest losses in crime. One of the things regarding the IC3, again, I would recommend go out, take a look at their website. They have consumer alerts, industry alerts out there that are very current. When I went out there this morning, they had an industry alert, of course, related to business email compromise. That alert was dated 7/7, so just July 7th, and it has to do with these cloud-based email services and these phishing kits that are out there that are really designed to mimic the cloud-based services that businesses are using from cloud-based email services. And again, the ultimate reason why a banker is participating today is after that compromise takes place, what is happening, really ultimately what they're trying to get to is the request to misdirect those transfers of funds, whether it be ACH wire transfers, sometimes even bank checks to be mailed. So Eric, I don't know if you have anything that you guys are seeing on those cloud-based services, but that was an alert that was out there this morning that there's these phishing kits that are available that fraudsters are now using to really mimic cloud-based emails.
Yeah, the big thing there is, if people have been tuned into anything SWICKtech has been saying over the last year, it's put MFA on it, which stands for multi-factor authentication, and you can apply that to cloud-based email like Office 365 Exchange in the cloud. That's something it's not a silver bullet, but it's critical to put that on there. It's about as close as you can get right now to really minimize the amount of threats coming through.
Super. So take some time if you have to just take a look at that website from time to time, help educate your staff internally as what the newest alerts are and frauds that are happening in your community. Kind of moving to the second topic, again, business email compromise. IC3, when they break it down even further, those reports, 23,000, more than 23,000 really are related to business email compromise. When you looked at the previous slide in that $3.9 billion, at least 1.7, over 1.7 billion of those losses are directly tied back to a business email compromise. You know, before we've talked a lot about these targets being targeted on the CEO or the CFO. That is still happening. We're still seeing it at a bank. But what this slide is intended to do is really talk about how business email compromise continues to evolve. Over the years, between 2013, 2014, and now we sit here at 2020, these are really becoming much more targeted. Personal emails, vendor emails. We work a lot on the spoofed lawyer emails, accounting emails that are targets, the requests for W-2 information. The real estate sector with these business email compromises have been hit very, very hard. As you can imagine, we work through a lot of closings, both on the business side and the residential side and mortgages. These are legitimate transactions and legitimate movement of money when you're buying or selling a home or property or a building. But these fraudsters are really honing in on these business email compromises and changing that account information, changing it to a prepaid card, to an offshore account, to an account where the money comes in and goes overseas almost instantaneously before anybody realizes the account information was changed on a legitimate transaction. So the real estate industry, title companies have been hit very, very hard. As you can imagine, rates are at an all-time low. So mortgages, people are doing new financing constantly and moving money around. I'm always amazed every day at how many emails I receive with confidential account information to do a wire transfer via email. As much as we try to do these seminars and educate businesses, we have to continue to do that education internally. not only here at the bank, but for our customers and for your staff and your employees. Although you may have talked about it before, you need to continually do that re-education on the importance of sending secure emails, knowing who you're getting them from before you open it, and don't just easily change payment information because you received an email asking you to do so. The payroll funds part, in 2019, IC3 really observed this huge increase in target to payroll companies as well. And these types of scams from business email compromise related to payroll, they're really across the board. What we're seeing the most of is where human resources folks are being contacted by employees to change their account information and redirect their direct deposit for payroll. Here's my new routing number and account number. I have a new bank. More often than not, those are then being misdirected to a prepaid card account. That electronic movement of money, that routing number and account number that you need for direct deposit of payroll, you as an employer or a business owner, you can't identify if that's a legitimate bank account on the other end, or if it's a prepaid card, or where that money is going. So make sure you're always picking up the phone, talking to that person you know and trust, talking to that employee, and verifying that change of account information is accurate. It is critical.
Penny,
and
that
I know
is,
we sound like, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I've heard a real life example of that story in a prospect meeting. An employee had recently got married. This is a real life situation out of a business in Milwaukee. Employee got married. His email account was compromised. He didn't realize it because the rules had been changed in his inbox, so he wasn't really alerted to anything, didn't realize things weren't getting out. And the from that email account, the bad actor emailed the CEO of the company and said, hey, because I got married, I need to change my routing information for my bank account direct deposit. She did it. A week later, he came into her office and said, hey, I didn't get my paycheck today. Did something happen? She said, what do you mean? I thought you requested your direct deposit to be changed because you got married. And he said, I never requested that. And then they identified, what had really happened there. So that whole call and talk to people and validate and verify, I think, is probably some critical advice to be taken, to not just take it for like following a request from an email.
And then continuing to really verify, and the best way to do that is verbally and from a partner you know and trust. Oftentimes, they're calling a phone number that's at the bottom of the email. That's not helping. Certainly, hopefully, the fraudster is smart enough that they've changed that email and phone number to someone in their fraud organization. So please make sure it's contacting somebody verbally you know and trust at a phone number you have on file. We wanted to highlight some of the actual scams that are taking place in regards to those direct deposit changes. This one particular is to an offshore account. But if you look at CrimeDex as a company that we work with a lot, they continue to update us on the crimes that they're seeing every single day. So as a financial institution, we get information from a company called CrimeDex every day. Certainly it's a company you can look at online as well. But one of the examples that they had on 5/20 that they gave to all of the financial institutions, that fraudsters really are targeting these HR functions, convincing employees to swap out their direct deposit banking information. Now, in this particular case, it was a nonprofit in Kansas City. You see a lot of things regarding nonprofits published out there on the internet. They tend to share more because they are nonprofits or public entities about their fraud situations than commercial customers do. Please know it doesn't mean it's not happening to commercial clients. It is, for-profit and nonprofit alike. You just do tend to see more of the nonprofits sharing that information online. But again, this was Kansas City. They explained several attempts per month involving scanners trying to convince payroll personnel to change that information where to send the employee payroll. The IRS knows about this uptick in attempts. But again, we really want to make sure that you're taking this information back to the folks in HR, to the folks that are taking payroll requests for changes, and making sure you understand not only what the policy says, on how to change information for your account number and routing number for direct deposit. But is there a way to test and make sure that those folks responsible for that are adhering to or following that policy? And an email is not enough because of the compromises we're seeing. Some of the 2019 crime types, again, these are the numbers of victims reported. This is going back to that same data from IC3 from 2019. Just taking a look, credit card fraud is something as a financial institution we still see a very large number in. A lot of this we've talked about, but thought we should really take some time so you can take a look at the victims reporting these types of crimes. Again, this is not the dollar amounts, but the number of crimes reported in 2019 to the IC3 alone. The ASP is an organization, they govern, I'm a certified treasury professional. So the ASP is the Association for Financial Professionals. It's a global organization. They're a governing body for a lot of accreditations that we hold as financial partners, both corporate treasury managers as well as financial treasury managers. Typically, there's some type of certified treasury professional, and the AFP is governing that accreditation. So they're making sure that we're current and staying up to speed on the current rules and regulations and what's happening in the fraud industry. But the AFP puts together an annual fraud report. This is their 2020 report. Again, much of that information is based off of the data and the surveys they received from 2019. But this is really a critical slide, and I know there's a lot of percentages on here, but there's a reason we share this information. 81% of companies were targets of payment fraud last year. This is across all industries, as we talked about before, for-profit and nonprofit alike. This is really important, 81% of companies. So it's not a matter of if I'll have fraud, I haven't had fraud before, I'm not worried about it. We're now in a fraud landscape that it's not if, it's a matter of when. When you look at these numbers and you see 81% of companies were targets of payments fraud last year. To break it down even further, 74% experienced check fraud. Checks continue to decline. The usage of checks continues to decline, which is great. But checks continue to account for 42% of business-to-business payments fraud. So when you're outside of that retail, when you think of a point-of-sale industry, when we're going to the store, much of that tends to be credit card fraud. But when you're looking at business-to-business or back-end payment solutions for companies, checks continue to account for 42% of that fraud. It is what I spend the majority of our time and energy on here at the bank. The losses don't tend to be as large as the business email compromise or wire fraud losses, but we do still spend a lot of time and energy on old school check fraud. And how is that happening? Typically, it's very hard to track down the point of compromise, but we work closely with local authorities, closely with the FBI when it's a more national check fraud experience. But it tends to be one of two things, where checks are compromised in the mail, where they're being compromised at the point that somebody put it in a mailbox. Believe it or not, people are still putting mail in an industry park outside in the mailbox and putting the red flag up, letting fraudsters know there's mail, come and take it. There's typically checks and payments. Fraudsters know that a basket or a bin full of mail is waiting for the mailman. They watch. It might be inside your vestibule or inside the lobby. Fraudsters know, they dress up, they look like mail carriers, and they walk in and take that bin of mail. The checks are in there. So again, we continue to help our customers roll out payment solutions to get those paper checks out of the mail system. The other place that we see a lot of check fraud still happening is what we call Operation Homeless. Operation Homeless is where fraud rings will target homeless folks or individuals that maybe are really in need of some financial assistance, and they have a valid ID. That's all they need, and they'll issue checks payable to these folks off of a routing number and account number from a real business. There are counterfeit checks. These are not real. They'll send these homeless folks an individuals into financial institutions to negotiate the checks with a valid ID that matches the payee information on a check, get them to cash that check, they clean them up, they give them food, they buy them clothes, they get them to be basically part of their fraud ring to negotiate these items, and then they walk away with meals, showers, clothes, and some money. It's really unfortunate because then again, when the bank does get in front of this, who are we arresting? We're arresting the guy that's down on his luck, and typically the fraud ring and the fraudsters that put him in front of the financial institution is nowhere to be found. So again, we're finding a lot of checks compromised in the mail, Operation Homeless still happening. Get your checks out of the mail if you can. Take them to the post office yourself when you have to mail them, not outside of your office door. Anytime you can take payroll checks out of the system. We talked about payroll fraud. You still have to do it right, but direct deposit is the way to go. Getting those paper checks out of the system. All I need is your routing number and account number off the bottom of that check, and we can commit all kinds of fraud. A fraudster can do anything with that routing number and account number. If you take a look at the business email compromise, again, 75% of organizations experience business email compromise according to the AFP. This is in 2019. Out of that, 54% reported a financial loss. 42 said that wires were targeted. 37 said that ACH was targeted. We'll talk about a little bit of the difference between those payment types, between wire and ACH, just so the folks on the phone lines really understand that although they're electronic funds, they're very, very different. Our goal today is, yes, let's please make sure we continue to educate and train our employees. This isn't something that's one and done. You have to continually talk to your folks about it because it's continuing to happen. Incorporate that process we talked about before about validating that payment information, preferably verbally from someone you know and trust. Some good news here, 40% on wire fraud, that's according to the AFP again, but that's down from 48% in 2017. So we are seeing some great news as far as, although business email compromise hasn't slowed down, the ability to conduct the wire fraud from it is coming down. So that education and training is helping, but it cannot stop. We have to continue that ongoing training. And please make sure you think about every user that you have. If they have access to bank account information, business online banking, commercial online banking, if they have the ability to move money out of your accounts, direct deposit, wire transfer, those employees need extra training, ongoing training and education. It's critical. You might even want them to sign a form with their expectations on how they behave online regarding, can I go to Pinterest? Can I go to Facebook from my work computer? You may not want to allow those, especially those employees with bank access, to be able to have those types of privileges. Kind of taking a look, commercial credit card fraud, please, we're not going to spend a lot of time on that today, but it's definitely something that's increasing. That 5% is an increase in credit card fraud from 2018 to 2019. One of the good news is, this is also great news, 60% of the organizations that took this survey reported they have a fraud policy in place. My biggest question for you on the phone lines is, do you? And if you don't, it might be a huge takeaway that one of the things you want to do first is put that policy procedure in place. It is so much easier when you're not in a 911 situation and the fraud has occurred or it is happening. Just like with ransomware, you don't want to wait until you have the ransomware take place to figure out what is our policy, what are we going to do. You're now in a 911 situation, what's our plan? So make sure if you don't have that policy or procedure in place that you start working on it. You know, one of the scenarios that I always equate it to is in my office, I have an escape route, a back door, and I have a big fire extinguisher right behind me, which is always really lovely in my office. But we have to be tested. They come in here and make sure it's all working. They test us as an organization to make sure we know what to do when there's a fire drill. We know what to do if there's an armed shooter in the building. and we test those things all the time. But do we test our fraud policies and our practices in place? Number one, do we have them? And do we test them to make sure everybody knows what to do and what the plan is if and when it does take place? Eric, I'm not sure, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
There was a question that came through, so I was just letting you wrap up there. The question is, are there companies which use virtual terminal to process ACH and credit card payments?
So the virtual terminals, it really depends, and that's where I think it's critical that you engage your IT and your technology partner like SWICKtech in that conversation. It depends on the virtual terminal. It depends on, the value-added networks that you're communicating between there. For us, as a financial institution, especially with COVID, many of us are working from home, but there's a great deal that has to go through that of how we're connecting and the safety and secureness of any one of those virtual terminals. Eric, you might be better to talk about the safety on connecting through a remote site and the security around that.
I am probably not me personally, but that is a question that we can flag. And if you want to send us a message with your contact information to our email, we'll be sending out some follow-up tomorrow. We'd be happy to go much deeper on any very specific questions and involve some of the engineers on our side if it's something that's out of my personal wheelhouse here.
That network connection and the security around it is critical. A financial institution typically does not stop you from originating ACH or wires from those networks that may be unsecured. Your user ID and password, oftentimes the bank, when we'll talk about this too, will give you a token or a security key fob to make that different every time you log in, especially when you're originating outbound payments. But the bank typically does not stop you. So if you have an employee with that level of access and they have their key fob or security token with them needed for a payment, like an ACH payment, the bank isn't going to stop you from originating that in an unsecured network as long as you're using all of those steps to log in. We expect that you train your employees that they're not to do that as a financial institution. Now, it doesn't stop them. Banks typically do have the ability to set up that we can control what URL you're logging in from. We can control that and set that up on the back office side. But I can tell you not very many customers ask a bank to do that. And we only do it, and I'm talking about financial institutions in general, if the company asks us to restrict that access. So knowing when you log in, it will block you if it's not coming from that IP address that we expect it to come from. We can block that as a financial institution, but most companies don't. So it is something that it's critical that you have that conversation not only with your technology partner and when they're logging in virtually or from another terminal or network, especially my folks that can do ACH or wire payments, what type of security do we have around that connection? And then also talk to your financial institution and your bank and say, does my business online banking, commercial online banking allow me to restrict what IP address comes into the bank, and will it block them if it doesn't come in to one of those that we have allowed? We have that capability, but that conversation doesn't happen enough. And if the bank automatically did it, and then you've got people working from home, or depending upon how your network is set up, it might be coming in from different IP addresses, we'd be blocking your users all the time. And we don't want to do that. So it's a conversation you actually must have not only with your technology partner, but with your bank partner, your treasury management partner. I hope that makes sense.
No, thank you for the comprehensive answer there. And we'll keep it moving along. I didn't see any other questions come through. I was going to ask one if there wasn't, but that was a great question, so thank you.
Positive pay fraud protection is something that I just wanted to highlight. Positive pay fraud protection is something that's been around for 30 years. This is not something new, but it's still something that most business customers do not take advantage of with their financial institution. Almost all banks, credit unions, financial institutions that are out there are offering a positive pay product. But it's really interesting that this fraud protection service offered by banks typically is not implemented by companies until after the fact or until after the fraud happens. It's really amazing. Eric and I did a presentation a couple years ago, talked about it. Still, how many hands really don't know what positive pay is, even though the product's been around for 30 years. So we thought we'd include a couple of slides. Know that your financial institution does offer these products. This is not something unique to North Shore Bank. But as we go through the next couple of slides, you'll see what positive pay is, how it can help you. But positive pay really has two functions. It can serve as a check protection and or an ACH or an electronic debit protection. So this slide is on the checks because that check fraud is still so prevalent that we talked about earlier. Positive pay for your checks is really, really critical. And it doesn't matter what type of institution you are. Again, nonprofit, for-profit. What positive pay does is it allows the business customer to upload their issued checks into their online banking system. That way, the bank knows what checks you have written. We know who you wrote them out to, the dollar amount, the check number. So we have all of the information on your issued check files before you send them out. It's very easy. Most banks can map to whatever that download format is. So if you're using QuickBooks or whatever system you're using from an accounting platform to download your issued check file or to create those issued checks and print them, you should be able to easily upload that file into your financial institution. That way, when items are presented for payment, we can match it to what you shared with us, the bank, on the issued side. And then if there's any discrepancies, let's say you mailed the check out for $500, it's clearing your account for $5,000 instead of the $500. The bank will flag that item as an exception, bring it to your attention and say, take a look at this exception or suspect item today. Do you want to make a pay or return decision before there's a loss? The biggest reason why positive pay is critical on the business side. Business clients have to dispute payments fraud with a 24-hour to 48-hour time window without incurring a loss. That's incredibly different than we as consumers. As consumers, we're protected by all kinds of different consumer rules and regulations that do not apply to businesses. So we as consumers typically, instead of having 24 to 48 hours to dispute any type of fraud, we can go to our bank within 45 to 60 days and dispute a fraud and more than likely get our money back. A business does not have those same types of protections. This isn't unique again to North Shore Bank. This is any bank in the country, any credit union in the country. This is a federal regulation. Those consumer rules do not protect us as business owners or our business accounts. And again, this is a much harder conversation to have after the fact when I say to a business customer, oh, you experienced check fraud. By the way, we had positive pay and it could have helped you if you were using that service. So again, just creating an awareness. It's been around forever. Still less than 25% of companies in the United States use the service until after they've had check fraud. ACH piece, ACH stands for the Automated Clearinghouse Association. It's nothing more than an electronic debit. You're sharing your routing number and account number in today's environment with tons of trusted partners. The IRS, the Wisconsin Department of Revenue, depending upon what state you're in, whatever that state where you're paying your taxes, your payroll provider, your insurance company, you are sharing that routing number and account number with tons of trusted vendors and partners. And there's absolutely no problem with that. Again, I encourage that. I want checks to get out of the mail. Check fraud to decline would be great. But it's really important that you have some level of protection from your bank, that as you share that confidential information with these trusted partners, that the bank, if you use positive pay and the ACH portion of it, we could block them from happening, saying this account shouldn't have any of those electronic debits. I don't share my information. Or you know what? Filter in the IRS. Filter in the Wisconsin Department of Revenue. let my bank come in and take my loan payments. Maybe SWICKtech will set you up for automatic debits. Let SWICKtech come in, filter in those trusted vendors and partners, and the bank can build that authorized list for you. Then if ABC company tries to debit me and they're not authorized, I'm going to get that wonderful email alert from my bank saying you have a suspect item. Please go and take a look at it before it's a loss. ACH debits, there's a hard and fast rule on these. You only have 24 hours to dispute an ACH debit on a business account. We can't even attempt to return it to the Federal Reserve after that. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. That's interesting. The differences between the consumer world and the business world, and the perception we might have as consumers that own businesses, this is really enlightening.
And have the conversation with your financial institution. Ask them about positive pay. Again, typically this is a fee-based service, but I can tell you it's much easier to stop it from happening before you experience the loss, you can't recover the payment, then you're working with your insurance company trying to recover the money. It's a lot easier to try to get in front of it.
Makes sense.
I said we would mention just the difference quickly between EFT, ACH, and wire. EFT is nothing more than electronic funds transfer. Typically, ACH and wire transfers are those payment tools used to conduct the electronic movement of money. And again, we encourage that you use these as long as you're doing it safely and keep some of these fraudsters and their techniques in mind to make sure your practices and policies around them keep you safe. And I'll talk about on the next slide a few of the key differences. Wires really are a real-time movement of money and finality of payment. That's why business email compromise attacks the wires, because the money moves so quickly. And once it's moved, its finality of payment, you cannot get it back. You can request a wire transfer back, but the receiving party, the receiving bank, does not have to give it back to you. And fraudsters know this, which is why wires are used for the largest payments out there. It's why they're used to buy a house, because it's finality of payment, and you want to make sure you have money received that someone cannot pull back. And ACH, again, electronic movement of money, but it's historically a next day movement of money, a future dated payment, and an ACH is not finality of payment. So something to know if you're accepting in a wire transfer, know it's finality of payment. I got the money. I can give you your house or your product or service. If I have an ACH come in, it's not finality of payment. Whoever sent it to me has up to 48 hours to pull it back. So if I gave them their product, shipped them their product, and I didn't wait that 2-day window, that money could go back and my bank has to return it. Both really great payment types. Wires can be very expensive. ACHs are very inexpensive. Now you kind of understand the reasons why. Real-time movement of money versus a future dated payment. And then again, that ability to pull it back, the finality of payment. When I talk about ACH as being historically next day movement of money or future dated payments, same day ACH was rolled out in 2016. I really want you to talk to your financial partners regarding the fraud and risk around same day ACH payments. They continue to roll this out in phases. Same day ACH rolled out in very small numbers in the beginning, and the value had to be very low. Now with the most recent changes in March of this year, you can do a same day ACH for up to $100,000. That's a big number, and the fraud and risk in this ACH world is different. Please make sure you talk to your bank about it, because it can be very exciting to think, oh, I can move these large dollars really quickly, same day. It's really inexpensive to do it, unlike a wire, but make sure you talk to your financial partner around those risks. And no matter what kind of movement of money, always do it securely with dual control processing. I talk about these key fobs. I talk about dual control. One user creates the payment, a second user has to approve it. It should absolutely happen from 2 different PCs. Doesn't matter what kind of movement of money you're doing, make sure you have those safeguards in place.
One of the questions that had popped through just a moment ago when we got to this slide, someone had asked, is a PayPal direct draw from the bank account a secure way of payment towards online vendors?
You know, PayPal is a wonderful tool to use money quickly, efficiently, and it's inexpensive. Now, PayPal, as you can imagine, is not a financial institution. So yes, it's secure as long as you're logging into it from a secure network. It absolutely is. I think it's a great way to move money. Like I said, it's fast, it's easy, it's inexpensive, but I would definitely consider the dollar value you're moving through PayPal. Because it's not a financial institution, because the funds aren't FDIC insured, the money is at some degree of risk. So if you're talking $30, $300, maybe $3,000, depending upon the size and scope of your business, no problem. I have seen where there are very large dollars processing and moving through PayPal for a commercial company. Really make sure you understand what your risks are. If something were to go wrong, not only in the security of the PayPal network, but with PayPal itself, they are not a financial institution and not governed by the same bodies. So it has its place. Is it secure? Absolutely, depending upon if you're logging in through a secure network. But definitely, I recommend keeping those dollar values small relative to your organization size. And again, small may depend on the size of your organization, but if you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars moving through PayPal, definitely a conversation you want to have with your financial institution so you understand your risk and options. Hopefully that answers your question. Eric, I don't know on the IT side if you have any value to add, because it does depend on where you're logging into your PayPal account as well.
I mean, like, you know, from what I've learned in the cybersecurity landscape and some of the attacks that exist out there, one of them that I'm aware of is man-in-the-middle attack. So if you're on a public network at a coffee shop or something, you know, you very well could be visible, and someone could be intercepting some things. So to that point, I would just echo what you said there about being on a secure network and maybe not doing that in the public space. Again, obviously, depending upon what we're talking about as far as the transaction. If it's $20 or something, it's very different than if we're talking 50,000, 100,000, et cetera. So.
Exactly. Enhanced security, we covered a lot of this, so we can buzz through these slides fairly quickly to make sure we have enough time for the questions and answers today. But enhanced security really is where we're talking about those security key fobs that I mentioned, those tokens that you might get from your bank. Anything where you're talking about how do I access my information, how frequently, dual control processes, securing your credentials. This is another slide that I use. It's getting kind of dated from AFP, but it's very relevant. Conducting daily reconciliations of transaction activity. When I talk about all these bank rules and regs, it's my job to stay current with them, but most businesses don't. When I talk about the 24 hours, 48 hours, UCC codes and regulations, who's liable for risk and fraud, that comes up a lot. And really, when you look at it, if you're not reconciling daily and reporting fraud to your bank within 24 hours, more than likely the company's liable, not the bank. That has shifted. So securing your credentials is important, dual controls, using extra security when logging in with key fobs out of band, but daily reconciliation. And that's why that positive pay product we talk about becomes so important, because most businesses don't have time to reconcile daily. So positive pay helps you get in front of that, and it controls any outbound movement of money and tries to red flag suspicious transactions for you. But really look at some of this information. 44% of companies are implementing systems and disaster recovery plans. These are some of the best practices we really want you to take a look at. I mentioned it too, restricting computers or networks and access, especially for those folks that are making payments. Restricting those computers for the people that you're allowing to use PayPal. All of those things, when Eric talks about man in the middle, it all kind of comes together with this slide.
Thank you. Yeah, and the MFA piece for that is something I think we probably could never say enough. We always recommend if you could use it for everybody, please do, but start with the people where you're protecting decisions and you're protecting money. Put MFA in between those things where applicable.
Challenge security questions. I know that you think that these things are in place, but your basic business online banking users typically only need challenge security questions. When I say basic users, someone that's just looking at account information, they can't move money around. Maybe they can do internal transfers, but no wires or ACH. Typically, as long as they have some of the basic security in place, that's fine. As a company, you may want more, but make sure at least those basic users still have at least multi-factor in place. Eric, we can buzz through some of this fairly quickly. Security tokens and key fobs, when I mention them, they tend to look something like this. A token, you press the button, the number changes. When you're entering your user ID and password in to access the bank, especially if you have money movement tools, a number that changes that's unique to you is required in addition to your unique user ID, password, PIN. This is something that you should have in your possession. If I require tokens, I'm an employee, and so does the other person accessing the bank, and I forgot mine and I go pick up that individual's token, it won't work. It is definitely something unique to you that you need to access your online banking. Most banks have also added the token requirement, that extra layer of security, not only when you log in, but when you're actually doing an outbound ACH or wire transaction. So oftentimes now it's not only needed at login, but also at the time of transaction before the payment is released. So when I talk about key fob security tokens, this is what they are. Out of band, I mentioned out of band numerous times. A lot of banks are moving away from that piece of token that you have to have in your hand, that piece of plastic. Although it works very well, people tend to lose them and forget them. Out of band, maybe I'm sending you that code to your phone, something unique to you that's out of that band of communication. So if I'm on my PC creating the wire transaction through my bank, again, I want dual control, 2 users, but instead of using the token, the bank may send that code to my cell phone, and then I enter that code in to get that transaction to complete. So we want to make sure you know what options are out there. If you are not using these or not being required to use them by your bank, absolutely make sure you change that immediately. The fraud triangle, again, we'll buzz through these things really quickly, but one of the things we do continue to see is internal embezzlement. Companies continually tell us that their employees, their family members trusted. We hear it all the time. But as you look through some of these slides and examples, please know internal embezzlement is happening every day, and it cannot happen if you're not allowing those employees in that trusted position or allowing that opportunity. You look at this fraud triangle, anybody that has a pressure that can rationalize why they're doing something, if they have the opportunity to commit fraud, they very well might. Something we talk about a lot is in organizations, we still see all the data that gets the report to the nation is about 30% of folks with the opportunity, when they have that pressure, they will commit internal embezzlement. These are just some examples. I don't want to kill something, but it was a huge example here not too long ago in Wisconsin in Cost Company. Very, very large internal embezzlement over a number of years. Millions and millions of dollars was taken from that company internally. It was very well publicized. One thing that I really want to point out in some of these things is the bank was not held liable for any of it. And so one thing you really have to be careful of is know that the liabilities and shift for external fraud, internal fraud has really moved from the company, from the banks where it used to be, to the companies. A Milwaukee woman accused of embezzling $33,000 from Heartland. They're not all big and huge like the cost situation. But if you haven't heard of these things, take some time. This is not unique from a banking perspective. We have to help our business customers with this more often than we'd like. More examples, and not to be funny, but again, these are Wisconsin-based companies in New Berlin, a payroll manager, and when you look at the statistic or the reasons, pain pills, alcohol, debts, pre-COVID, a lot of it was gambling debts. I'm going to take just a little bit, gamble it, I'll put it back into the company tomorrow, no one will notice. The goal is to make sure those folks do not have the opportunity to do the internal embezzlement. And again, not to be funny, but the Virginia woman accused of embezzling $93,000 for her wedding and to get a little plastic surgery. So please know that this is happening all the time. And as much as you think you have trusted team members, when that pressure is high enough, my mother's sick, I don't have the insurance I need. It's amazing sometimes good people sometimes do bad things, and just don't lose sight of having the controls in place. Trusted partners, we talked a lot about payroll fraud, changing account information. Vet your trusted partners. I don't care if it's your payroll processor, if it's your financial institution, if it's your technology partner, please do your homework on your partners. A lot of these trusted partners are committing fraud against your organization. You have to do your homework. I always recommend outsourcing payroll when you can. It's a great thing to do, but make sure you vetted your payroll processor. Financial institution fraud is huge. When I talk about no industry is immune, no industry is immune, all of us. So make sure when you're engaging in a partnership with some of these outsourced solutions, I highly recommend that you do so, but vet your partners. Payroll fraud is on the rise, and this is not just changing account information. This is where payroll companies are either being defrauded themselves or defrauding their customers. In the best interest of time, certainly I know we want to wrap it up, and I apologize that I went a little long. I put some alerts and examples out here. Take some time to take a look at it. These are just examples, a local payroll company that has fraud. It's really something we don't want to dismiss. This payroll company itself opened up a bank account, started doing payroll for a bogus company, and they suffered a loss of $72,000. Another one, Madison, Wisconsin, UW Parkside. Again, this is all public information. Lost 300. The loss to them after insurance will hopefully only be 65, but the payment fraud itself was 315,000. Again, you can see these things, they're all published online, but the whole goal in sharing some of these examples is that this is happening. A company went in and opened up a bank account under UW Parkside, started collecting these payments, and it was all completely fraudulent, and UW Parkside was sending the money over there. The bank really was the one to raise a flag. So please know that these situations are live, real, and yes, they're happening in Wisconsin. The ABA is the American Bankers Association, another fraud example. I do want to take just a quick minute on here. Fraudsters, as anything, are taking advantage of the whole COVID-19 situation. Tons and tons and tons of people are falling victim for these scams. They're getting business emails, requests from Center of Disease, World Health Organizations. Please be very, very careful. They are convincing folks to give them their bank account information because they think that they're going to get some sort of government relief money. We are getting hundreds of these in. The financial institutions are, and our customers, unfortunately, especially consumers, but not only consumers, are falling victims to these scams because they think that there's free money coming their way. They're giving social security numbers, account numbers, bank information, you name it. So just please be on the lookout of these scams. Some of the best practices here from the financial side, we talked about positive pay. Do surprise audits, please. Test your policies and procedures. Do proactive data monitoring and analysis. I can't tell you how many things are found much after the fact, especially on internal embezzlement. Have a dedicated fraud department, or if you're a smaller organization, at least a team or a committee that can talk about some of these things before it happens and what's our plan. They can put together an anti-fraud policy. Formal fraud risk assessment is something certainly that I'd be willing to help you with, certainly at no cost. Set up a tip line or a hotline so employees could call in. Maybe they're not comfortable talking to their boss about it. Maybe their boss is involved. Mandatory vacations are critical when you are talking about people that have access to your business finances. Requiring them to take a vacation for at least a week is important because that's where you might uncover that something was happening you weren't aware of. FTC.gov is a great resource for fraud as well, in addition to the IC3 that I talked about. And Eric, I'm sorry that I'm not leaving you a lot of time.
That's okay. I mean, we've done a few webinars on this list for the technical items here. And, you know, we have those on demand, but like working from the bottom, strong passwords, passphrases are what you want to go with. You can get it above 16 characters. That's not going to be cracked with modern technology. Software security policies. You know, we have a layered security approach to how we do things, and we're happy to say that we've had no clients under our agreements that have had a ransomware outbreak, and we've lost 0 bytes of data as a business around for 16 years in this space. So, you know, we're very proud of those things. We also have a very specific approach to security that we call the CMMI approach, which is a capability maturity model. And we've really put cybersecurity through that lens, and we help businesses plot themselves on that scale or that spectrum to understand where their gaps might be and help them identify those and fill those gaps from a cybersecurity standpoint. We're really big on employee training also when it comes to identifying these malicious attacks, and we do that for a lot of the accounts that we do work with. So, you know, I'll stop myself there to try to go quickly. You had another slide here before we kind of wrap up.
You know, and just really this best practices is know who to contact when something like this happens. Typically, we find businesses are contacting their IT department or their technology partner, but they fail then to contact the bank immediately. The goal here is to understand how intertwined all of this is, and the technology side and overlapping the financial side. Contact your accounting partner, insurance provider. This is if and when a fraud does take place. The local police department and reporting to the IC3 is critical. But again, know who those trusted partners are and don't miss one in the loop. And again, a best practice really would be is to contact them now so you know what's going on, you know what's happening, you know what the plan is from all your partners, you know what your risk and liability is, how much insurance do I have, and much better to know that beforehand than after the fact.
And what I'll touch on here briefly is for those that attended, for the first 5 folks that are interested, SWICKtech is offering a free phishing test. We leverage a company called KnowBe4 to initiate these and deploy them. So essentially, we will deploy a phishing test. It'll be tailored to your company, your business. We'll work with IT to get past firewalls and spam filters, etc. But what that does is it helps measure maybe some of the weak links in your company, not to call them out for calling them out sake, but to identify that, you know, this is a learning experience. And then we do training around that and help folks identify what not to click, what to look for, and be kind of more aware of that. And then we deploy another phishing test at the end to show how that has improved their security posture as humans being that end line defense. So that is something that we're offering for free for up to 5 interested companies. If that's something you're interested, please reach out to us and respond to the emails we'll send out tomorrow as follow-up, and we'd be happy to discover and learn more there.
And again, from the bank side, we really mirror that statement. I'd be happy to come on in, whether it's via phone or in person, whatever your team is most comfortable with. We would perform a complete treasury risk and task management review of your organization to give you ideas on where you might be able to improve, talk about policies, procedures. Again, this would be at no charge to you as a company, but we'd be happy to take a look at that whole payment structure that you have in place, everything from your business online banking users and what types of payments. I know it looks like we have a question that came in as well regarding a payment network that's offered to customers via Verizon, via a network provided through Verizon. This kind of review is something that we could actually look at really on a one-on-one basis for you, because there isn't a simple answer to that. Is it a secure network? It can be. And it depends what type of payments. Typically, those payments in that type of environment, if you're offering customers a solution to pay via phone, hopefully those are consumers and not businesses that are doing business with you, because then it's fine, because those consumer protections give them what they need. However, if it's a business-to-business payment, it's probably not the best solution. And in the agreements that you're signing to, it's probably only governing consumer payments. And when I say agreement signing, you probably just clicked a button. But certainly, it might be more specific than that, and I'd be happy to help with that on a one-on-one.
That's good to go. And then, before we get to the very last question I saw pop through, I wanted to make sure we did mention, on a totally separate note, we are running another Brain Food event about Microsoft Planner. So if you're looking to learn what that is, or learn the basics and understand that and leverage that as a Office 365 tool, that'll be on July 29th at 3 p.m. and SWICKtech will be presenting that. And to the last question that I had seen come through here, will we get a link to this webinar to view later? The answer to that question is yes. It was a very easy question. Thank you. Our marketing folks will be sending that out tomorrow at some point, likely in the morning, with a recap and everything else. So, and I know we're about 6 minutes over, so I don't see any other questions in here at this time. Thank you, everybody, for attending. We appreciate you giving us your time and ear for the day.
Super. Thank you as well.